Okay, this is a continuation of our discussion about intervals. We have taken intervals beyond our basics of knowing distances of thirds, fourths, fifths, etc. And now we understand that there are 5 possible qualities of intervals. So we learned major is a type, minor, perfect, augmented, and diminished. These are our 5 possibilities when it comes to intervals. So, for example, let's take A to C, for instance. And if I count, I'm going to start with A to C sharp because I would like to start with a major third. If I have a major interval and I want to create a minor interval, I need to make it 1/2 step smaller. So I've just made my major interval smaller, and that would create a minor interval. So major goes to minor. If I want to make that, and this would be spelled A to C, so that's my minor third. If I want to decrease that even smaller, I can then write A sharp to C, and I have just created a diminished interval. A sharp to C. Now you look at that and think, well, that looks like B flat to C. And it could be written that way too. But it would no longer be a third, it would be a second of some sort. So as long as I'm writing A sharp to C, you can see I have spelled an interval of a third, but it's a diminished interval. So it's much, much closer together than a major third, of course. Let's go back to our A to C sharp interval, which we learned was the major third. Now, if I want to increase this interval size by 1/2 step, then I am now going to move that note down, and I've just created A flat to C sharp, and that is called an augmented interval. So you can see I can take the same 2 letter names, A to C, and I can create 4 different intervals between A and C, depending on sharps and flats. All right, this is the complexity of intervals. So I'm going to erase. Let's review the concept. If I begin with a major interval and I make it larger, it becomes augmented. If I make it smaller, it becomes minor. And if I even go 1 step smaller, 1/2 step smaller, it becomes diminished. Okay? Now, where does perfect fit into all of this? Perfect intervals, the way perfect intervals work, perfect intervals cannot be major or minor. They are simply called perfect. So I'm going to erase my major and my minor, and in their place, my perfect interval. Perfect intervals can be made augmented and they can be made diminished, but they cannot be major and they cannot be minor. They are simply perfect. Let's draw an example. C to F is a perfect fourth. If I want to raise that by 1/2 step, then my perfect interval now becomes augmented. If I want to take my perfect interval and lower it by 1/2 step, let's go ahead and, shrink it by 1/2 step, then C sharp to F is now what we call a diminished fourth. So, again, when we start with a perfect interval, and if it's increased by 1/2 step, it goes straight to augmented, and if it is shrunk by 1/2 step, a perfect interval then becomes diminished.